The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to speak on Bill C-27, the Digital Charter Implementation Act. This legislation is the first update of federal private sector privacy laws in more than 2 decades. Contained within this bill are 3 distinct pieces of legislation, each of which are flawed in their own way. The first piece of legislation within this bill would establish the Consumer Privacy Protection Act, legislation that completely fails to protect personal and sensitive information of individual Canadians in the digital era. The second piece of legislation within this bill would establish a tribunal system with respect to complaints around potential privacy rights violations. I would submit that this tribunal system is duplicative, cumbersome, political, and will slow down the process in adjudicating and determining privacy complaints to the detriment of the individual Canadians and often to the benefit of powerful corporations. And the third piece of legislation within this bill seeks to establish a legal framework with respect to artificial intelligence systems. Let me say that it is important that the regulatory void that presently exists with respect to the AI sector be filled. But, Madam Speaker, the substance of the bill as it pertains to AI is fundamentally flawed. It contains vague language. More concerningly, it provides a significant amount of power, legislative power, in the hands of the Minister of Industry by way of regulation, absent parliamentary scrutiny. The government is essentially saying, with respect to AI, for Parliament to adopt a bill without knowing the details, without understanding the impact of the bill on AI. They're saying, trust us, trust the Minister to fill in the blanks and come up with the rules after the fact. Well, Madam Speaker, I don't trust this government on anything after they have gotten just about everything wrong over these past 8 years. In any event, it's an overreach, it's a power grab of sorts, it is inherently undemocratic, and it undermines investor confidence in the AI sector when we need investor confidence because of the uncertainty it creates in giving the minister the power to essentially come up with and change the rules on a whim. Without more, when it comes to the AI component of the bill, the government needs to go back to the drawing board and engage in meaningful consultation that simply did not take place. This is a complex bill. It's more than 100 pages long. It includes many complex and technical matters, and so in the very limited time that I have to contribute to this debate, I want to focus on how this bill fails to adequately protect the privacy rights of individual Canadians. Privacy has long been recognized as a fundamental right of Canadians. That is because it goes to the core of who we are as individuals and is essential to the enjoyment of fundamental freedoms. As the Supreme Court declared in a 1988 decision, quote, "Privacy is at the heart of liberty in a modern state," close quote, and that it is, quote, "worthy of constitutional protection," close quote. Unfortunately, Bill C-27 fails to put the privacy rights of Canadians first. Instead, it puts the interests of big corporations, big tech, and data brokers ahead of the rights of individual Canadians, and that, without more, is unacceptable, Madam Speaker. It is true that the preamble of the bill refers to privacy interests, and I emphasize the word interests as being integral to individual autonomy, dignity, and the enjoyment of fundamental freedoms. It is of significance that missing in the bill is any mention of rights, that instead privacy is referred to as an interest and not the right that it is. The absence of rights-based language in the bill tips the scale against individual Canadians in favor of commercial interests. And as a consequence, the tribunal, as well as the Privacy Commissioner, will face significant challenges in weighing, on the one hand, the privacy rights of Canadians against commercial interests, more likely than not, unfortunately, to the detriment of individual Canadians. And, Madam Speaker, don't take my word for it. Take the word of the former Privacy Commissioner of Canada, Daniel Therrien, who in a November 13, 2022 op-ed in the Toronto Star said that the absence of rights-based language in this legislation will, quote, "this will likely reduce the weight of privacy in assessing the legality of intrusive commercial practices," close quote. So that's the former Privacy Commissioner of Canada. And so, Madam Speaker, let me say that while the absence of rights-based language is a significant shortcoming in the bill, it's far from the only shortcoming in the bill when it comes to protecting the privacy rights of Canadians. The bill contains many exceptions and loopholes with respect to obtaining the consent of Canadians for the collection, use, and retention of data and private information, personal information. So wide are the exceptions, so wide are the loopholes, that the purported protections provided for in the bill are all but meaningless. The bill provides no clarity with respect to sensitive information. There are no broad categories around sensitive information worthy of additional protections, unlike legislation in other jurisdictions. The bill is completely silent with respect to the selling of data. It provides no limitations or rules around data brokers, and it provides nothing in the way of protections for Canadians around other areas, including it doesn't provide a remedy, for example, for moral damages in the case of data breaches. So, Madam Speaker, in so many respects, this bill falls short, and it's why it's been widely criticized by leading privacy experts. Canadians deserve better. It is why Conservatives will be voting against this bill. This government needs to go back to the drawing board. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, the member started off by talking about the sense of urgency that is there because of the timing. It has been many, many years since we've seen the modernization or legislation to deal in a substantial way with the issue of privacy on the internet, and there's all forms of data banks and others that are out there. People want to have the assurance that the national government is in fact acting on the issue. My concern is that we have the Conservative Party who seems to be determined not to see privacy legislation even if they disagree with it, the principles of the legislation, I believe, are very positive. And I would ask, why would the Conservative Party not want to see this legislation at least get to a committee stage where it can be further discussed?
The honourable member for St. Albert Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, in answer to the Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader, the answer is that the bill is so flawed. It's fundamentally flawed. It's unsupportable on that basis. If it were a matter of a few amendments, then it would make sense to send the bill to committee on the basis that the bill was supportable on principle. But that is not the case with respect to this bill. Indeed, with respect to the consent provisions of the bill, this bill arguably takes a step back from the completely inadequate measures that are provided for in PIPEDA.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to ask my colleague, in the artificial intelligence portion of the bill, it's suggested that there would be self-regulation. I'd like to know if he supports self-regulation or if, on the contrary, the state should govern the use of AI more.
Honourable member for St. Albert Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, what we need with respect to the AI component of this bill is clarity, and we need certainty. What we don't need is the power grab that this government has afforded itself, whereby the minister is going to be afforded enormous powers by way of regulation that are going to create significant uncertainty. There was a complete lack of consultation. That consultation, I believe, only began in June and underscores why the bill needs to be scrapped, needs to be defeated, and the government needs to go back, do its homework, engage in consultation, and get this right.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And we've been talking a lot today about, and I'm certainly heard clearly from Conservatives, that this bill is without redemption and that it can't be fixed. It's just too flawed. One of the previous speakers for the Conservatives mentioned that maybe it could be split into two because it is so large. And certainly I agree. There are so many things that are the matter with this bill, and this isn't the first time we've seen Liberal legislation that is highly flawed and that we try and spend a great deal of time on fixing. But the Parliamentary Secretary said it in terms of the timing. My own colleague said it in terms of the timing of this going back, taking that time, knowing that the industry is moving so quickly, that technology is moving so quickly. So are there any recommendations that this member could make that when it goes to committee, they could, maybe splitting that bill into two would be potentially helpful, but so that we do take that time, it's out there now, and what we can do to make this better. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for St. Albert Edmonton.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the member for London Fanshawe for that question. And let me say that if this bill is passed, given the trend with respect to data practices, this bill is, for all intents and purposes, already out of date, and that is a problem. But I would submit that if it is studied at committee, which I expect that it will require significant amendments around protecting the individual privacy rights of Canadians. Major gaps that are missing from this legislation that I outlined, including with respect to sensitive information, the lack of broad categories, the fact that that isn't defined. That needs to be worked on, and there's a whole lot of other provisions, so many, in fact, which is why we can't support the bill.
Resuming